Oh, okay.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final virtual day of the California Small Farm Conference. We're really excited to have you guys here for this workshop. Just wanted to welcome you here and let you know if you are here for the Monarch and Pollinator Conservation on California Farms workshop, you're in the right place. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and I just want to give a big thank you to our presenters today for speaking on this really important topic. There's just so many acres in agriculture here in California, which means so much potential for pollinator habitat, and farmers and ranchers can play such a big role in preserving that biodiversity that we all depend on. Big thanks also to our sponsors and everybody who helped make this event possible. Today's workshop is being recorded. There'll be an evaluation that pops up on your screen at the end. If you want to take just a couple of seconds to let us know what you think, that'd be great. And lastly, I really want to encourage you guys to feel free to use the chat function to make comments. But if you have any questions, down at the bottom, you'll see a little button that says Q&A. Just pop that in. And if you have questions for our presenters today, go ahead and ask a question there, and we'll do the best we can to answer those. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jessa. Jessa is going to get us started. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much, Evan. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Give me just a second while I click through things and get my screen set up here. Let's see. Can everyone see that? Holler if you can't.
Looks great.
Excellent. All right. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about creating pollinator and monarch habitat on California farms. My name is Jessica Cruz. I'm the Senior Pollinator Conservation Specialist with the Xerces Society. I'm based out of Sacramento, which is located on the ancestral land of the Miwok Maidu and Nisenan people. Just for those of you who don't know, the Xerces Society is an international nonprofit group. We've been around for over 50 years, and we work to protect biodiversity through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats. I think most of you who are joining us today probably already have a sense of the value and importance of pollinators. But just to throw a couple of interesting statistics out, about 85% of the world's flowering plants require an animal, and that's usually an insect, to move pollen in order to reproduce. So in our ecological systems or our natural systems, pollinators are obviously really important and can be considered keystone species in our terrestrial ecosystems. And then in our food systems, pollinators are obviously super important. About 1 in every 3 bites of food that we eat required pollinator, and that comes out to upwards towards $30 billion of value in the United States alone of pollinator-dependent crops. Although this talk today is mostly focused on pollinators, I did also want to just mention the value of our natural enemies. So these would be natural enemies of crop pests, sometimes referred to as beneficial insects like lady beetles, or syrphid flies or lacewings. And these groups of insects, these natural enemies, use a lot of the same resources and the same types of habitats as pollinators. So things that we do to help pollinators also benefit our natural enemies. A lot of folks have been hearing probably a lot of information over the past couple of years regarding insect declines. There was a really interesting study that came out a couple years ago. It was a worldwide compilation of a series of long-term studies. And this white paper basically determined that there's been a almost 25% decline in insect abundance just over the past 30 years and close to 50% declines over the past 75 years. So that loss of our insect communities worldwide across the board can really have some dire consequences and a really big impact on our sort of ecological systems as a whole. Our pollinators are in particular decline. I think they are some of the most vulnerable groups of insects. Almost 30% of our bumblebees in the United States, our bumblebee species, are considered threatened. Almost 20% of our North American butterfly species are considered at risk. And then I'm sure a lot of you have heard about our Western monarch population declines. Western monarchs have declined by about 95% in the past couple of decades. And this does include this year's data. So, you know, monarchs did have a little bit of a rebound this year. We were super happy to see that. But even with that rebound, they're still down 95% from where they were even just in the 1990s. So we're definitely not out of the woods yet. And the other thing about these insect declines that I think is really concerning is that they include not just sort of our habitat specialists that maybe have real niche habitats, but these declines also include these formerly common and widespread species like the Western monarch. So it's really across the board that we're seeing these insect declines. There's a lot of factors that are all working together to contribute to pollinator declines, and we're not going to go super in depth into that today, but habitat loss or degradation is a really big factor. Pesticide exposure is another one, and this exposure is happening not just in agricultural areas, although often that's where people sort of lay the blame, but pesticide use is widespread in our urban and suburban, as well as our rural areas, working lands and non-working lands alike. So it's really across all landscapes. And then climate change, that is a very complex problem, as we all know, working in a number of different ways to really contribute to insect declines. But I like to focus on the positive and thinking about, well, what can we do to help? How can we address insect declines? And, you know, creating habitat is really one of the most meaningful things that people can do on an individual level to help pollinators. And I look at this work as sort of a win-win. Attracting pollinators can help obviously contribute to crop pollination, but also all of those natural enemies that I mentioned before. Those natural enemy populations will use the same types of habitats and benefit from the same practices as pollinators and really contribute potentially to pest management on your farm. In terms of what it is that habitat provides, I think first and foremost, we're just talking about a source of food. Pollen and nectar make up 100% of a bee's diet, for example, and many natural enemies, as well as many butterflies, sort of use pollen or nectar as a primary source of food at specific times in their life cycle. Habitat also provides shelter, provides overwintering sites, as well as nesting and egg-laying sites that are very important, obviously, for insects. And if managed properly, habitat provides really important refuge from pesticides. What's great is that we have a lot of data that shows a very direct link between habitat and beneficial insect, which means both pollinators and natural enemies. When I use that term beneficial insect, I'm referring to both of those groups. So we have all these data that really shows this direct connection between beneficial insect populations and natural habitat. So we know that creating habitat is a really important step that we can take. And, you know, I've been doing this work for going on 2 decades now. And one of the things that I have really noticed in doing this work is that some of the greatest barriers for folks to, especially farmers and ranchers, in adopting some of these practices, like planting a hedgerow or, you know, planting insectary strips or you know, wildflower meadow. Some of the greatest barriers to doing that habitat work include the cost of materials, right? Because plants are not cheap. And also a lot of uncertainty about which species to plant, and also sort of where to get the species that people want to work with. As well as just a lack of general technical knowledge in terms of like, how do I space my plants? How do I irrigate them? What kind of soil do I need? How do we care for them? Those are the kinds of things that I have felt like people really need some assistance with. So in order to address some of these challenges, Xerces developed our Habitat Kit program in California in 2019. It's a really unique program that offers carefully selected, native and regionally appropriate plant materials directly to our partners for shovel-ready projects. So the way it works is that partners can submit their proposals for projects, and then they can receive both the plant materials as well as direct technical support from Xerces for their projects. I think this program is a little unique in that we put a lot of effort into plant selection. The species that we have in these habitat kits include both general pollinator plants as well as very specific host plants for declining species of pollinators such as monarchs. And all of these data are based on research either by ourselves or some of our partners or community science research. So we're really making sure that we know that we're using the best plants possible using the knowledge and data that we have. And we also have a lot of different habitat kits that are tailored to specific geographic regions. So we have kits for the Central Valley, the Central Coast, Southern California, as well as the Sierra foothills. And then we also have kits that are specifically tailored for different types of landscapes. So for example, we have a hedgerow kit. We've also got sort of these smaller garden kits for urban farms or school gardens. We've got riparian kits for riparian areas, grassland kits for grassland restoration. So all in all, we actually have somewhere along maybe 16 or 17 different sort of specific kits depending on the landscape and the region. So we're really trying to tailor these for people to take out some of that guesswork. The other thing that I think is really nice about our program is that, we work with a number of different regional nurseries. So we're working with 4 different nurseries and 4 different regions so that we can get, both support local economies and also source plants, really locally, local ecotypes. And we contract with these nurseries to grow these plant materials out for us without the use of a harmful pesticide, so that when they get to the end user and get planted in the ground, there's no contamination of these plants. And that's not always the case. So that's something that we've worked really hard to be able to provide. We have partnered with all kinds of different people. We've partnered in our Habitat Kit project with farmers and ranchers, with tribes, city park managers, urban farms, community gardens, schools, natural lands managers, and also especially our resource conservation districts have been really excellent partners for this program. And I feel like we've made a really big impact. We're about to start our 2022 Habitat Kit season. So to date, in the last 3 years, as I mentioned, this program started in 2019 in California, but Xerces is a national organization. So we have spread the KIT program to 3 additional states since we started. We've supported a total of over 500 different projects and given away almost 300,000 plants since we started this program. I wanted to include a number of resources. So when I get done here, I'm going to go ahead and cut and paste these links into the chat box. The most important thing I did want to let people know is that as I mentioned, our 2022 Habitat Kit season just kicked off and we are currently accepting applications. So if people are interested in finding out more about that program, as well as applying to get some plants for 2022, that's that first link. Visit our website so you can get more information about what that is and how to do it. And with that, I am going to wrap it up here, and I'm going to pass it on to some of our farmers who we've worked with who have received kits. And they're going to share a little bit with us about what their experience was, how they used their kit, and yeah, how it worked out for them. And then we'll take Q&A at the very end.
Hi, I'm Sherry Wood, and I need to get my presentation. So let me go there. I think I'm sharing. Okay, does it look good? Okay. I'm Sherry Wood, and I own Patchwork Farm in Capay Valley, which is a little valley about an hour west of Sacramento. So I'm not in the Central Valley with all that heat, but I sure have a lot of heat in our small valley.
Hey, Sherry, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It looks like I can only see the preview version of your slideshow rather than the full version, unless it's just me, but.
If you hit play slideshow, or maybe play from start.
Okay. We're learning.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Sorry, Sherry.
Thank you. First time. So I purchased 28 acres in 2016. It had been dry farmed almond orchard from the 1950s. And as you can see in the picture, the trees had not been producing for years. And in fact, the farm had not been tended for at least 5 years. And so that let me be able to get my organic designation from the state within 2 years of buying the property. Then I have to go through my annual organic inspection to make sure I'm farming the land. I had no farming background whatsoever. I had lived in San Francisco for 30 years. I was following my dream of being a farmer, and I started at age 64. So I've had a lot, thank you, Jessa. I had a lot of learning to do in the last 5 years, and I have a lot of learning to go into the future. I have one full-time crew member, and during the summer, the harvest and the distillation season, I have 4 teenagers who help, and they're a great crew. I have 5 acres of lavender, 11 acres of olives, and a hedgerow. One of the things at our farm is that we embrace agritourism. So we get a chance to talk about our organic farm. Everybody loves lavender, and now we get a chance to talk about the hedgerow and the difference we're making. The reason we created the hedgerow was we had a seasonal creek bed that ran on the western portion of our property up against Highway 16. So by putting in a hedgerow, we had trees, tall trees, but by putting in the low hedgerow, I'm hoping to do a sound barrier. I'm hoping to provide a visual barrier, and then I'm wanting to provide all the natural habitat that Jessa just talked about. I also wanted to show this valley of farmers the benefit of a hedgerow. The neighbor just to the north of me, who's also on the seasonal creek bed, has cut away every piece of vegetation on his creek bed. He runs cattle, and so the degradation to that stream bed is pretty, it gives me shakes. I happen to be a fly fisherman, and it gives me heebie-jeebies to see that creek so exposed. So I'm hoping that one day somebody will come along and say, Sherry, your creek bed is great. It's got a lot of vegetation, it's got a lot of animals, it's got a lot of shade. What have you done? So maybe that will happen. We are educating our visitors about the benefit of pollinators. Honeybees are an interesting thing. They aren't going to sting you, but all the other pollinators. And having a hedgerow was integrated with our organic goals. As Jessa was saying, the barriers to creating a hedgerow. I told you earlier, I'm a brand new farmer. I got 28 acres acres, I've got limited staff. And so when the recommendation to put a hedgerow was in, I said, I don't have the technical knowledge. I don't have the staff to plant the plants, and I don't know what to plant. And it was absolutely wonderful. I did apply for a kit. I saw that that application went out earlier this week, so I know that the timeline is coming up to apply. The Xerces Foundation gave us 204 native California plants. I had to buy an additional 204. I have a 2-row hedgerow, and I also made sure that they were native California plants. They're taller plants. I've learned that small plants are called forbs, so I'm still learning. So we have about 400 native California plants all along our hedgerow. I'm very proud to have that wildlife habitat sign up on the property. It shows the various people who helped put this all together. And it was kicked off with the Xerces Foundation. The USDA, we got funding for an EQIP grant, which allowed us to buy those additional native plants, to buy the irrigation supplies, and to handle the weed maintenance. And my obligation as the recipient of these EQIP funds is to water and weed these plants for 3 years. The NRCS and the Center for Land-Based Learning, which is here in Sacramento, they have the student landowner environmental workshop, something. It's getting high school kids to be involved in farms, SLEWS, S-L-E-W-S. And they did the planting. So I welcomed everybody. They got out. The day before each planting day, I had put the little plants where I wanted them along our creek bed. Because of the EQIP funding, we had to have things spaced a certain way that the feds wanted, and that was no problem. And we got planted. We did 2 days because we had 2 rows. And they started at 8 and left at 2, and we had lunch and we had a nice time. And it was one of the best things that happened on my farm for the last 4 or 5 years. It happened on time, on budget, with a great spirit of camaraderie. So we put our plants in December of 2020. That was in COVID. So while we didn't get the SLEWS high school kids out planting, we got a high school teacher who took a video of all the SLEWS and NCRS employees planting the hedgerow. And you can see that we kind of curved it along the creek so that it would have a natural look. We've had 75% survival. The plants that had the most mortality was the milkweed, and of course we think milkweed is nectar for the butterflies, so we were a little disappointed that those plants didn't make it, but we have an answer for that. And as everybody here would know, 2021 was really hot. We started irrigation in May and kept it going through September. I have it on a timer. I run it twice a week. It's not a problem for me. And it makes me feel good knowing that I'm taking care of those plants. The cones, in reading, there are some hedgerows in the valley where people have left their cones on and it's 5 years later and the plants are growing up out of them. I wanted my plants to have, real live sun and real live air, so I took the cones off, the larger ones, and then put it back on this winter for when we've done our weed whacking. So I did a little extra work, but that's because I love walking along our hedgerow. And so I'm very happy that we harvested milkweed seed from the farm this year. We stratified it, I think is the word. We put it in the freezer for 4 weeks, and then we've been germinating in our greenhouse. We've had an 85% success when we put the seed in the native soil. We did some science experiments, native soil versus potting mix versus potting soil. And we're going to be sharing the milkweed. We're going to plant what we need, and then we've got over 120 milkweed plants right now, and we'll be sharing them with our neighbors. Already they're starting to the word's out. As Dee Dee Soto said from Xerces, I'm the milkweed dealer in Yellow County. And we'll be building an educational center this fall so that we've got shelter. It's the sun shelter that we want. So when people are out looking at our hedgerow, that's about where we have our pollinators. We do have bees that come in winter here, and we have them out there. So we think that we've provided a great environment for local pollinators, but I really hope for the migratory pollinators, the monarch. I hope that we're going to have more of them come by this summer. That's what we did at Patchwork Farm. Lee, I hand it off to
I
you.
think it's my turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me? All right, perfect. Okay, let me share my screen. I think Sherry, you need to stop sharing your screen so I can
I
share.
did.
Okay. There, perfect. Here it is. All right. So my name is Lee Stevenson, and I'm the Environmental Education Coordinator at Veggielution. And if you don't know what Veggielution is, Veggielution is an urban farm in the heart of East San Jose. Our mission is to connect people from diverse backgrounds through food and farming. We operate 6 acres of land on the Emma Prush Farm Park, where we have 4 acres of production fields. So in addition to our farms, we have a satellite site downtown San Jose called Sofa Pocket Park, which is a small urban garden where we hold art and garden activities for the community. On top of that, we serve our community through a number of different programs, one being Eastside Connect, which is a program where we partner with other organic farms to supply farm boxes to people in the South Bay area. And then we also have a smaller farm box distributing program, which is for East San Jose residents. And then we also have Eastside Grown, which is our entrepreneurship program for people in San Jose. So that's a little background. We're just under the 101 freeway where it connects to the 680. If you driving up the 101 and look over, you can see us. So first, we got awarded the kit from Xerxes Society to put in a native hedgerow. And what we did instead of doing a hedgerow is we kind of made a garden out of it. And we wanted to use the natives for a number of different reasons. So we wanted to bring in the natives to help support native ecosystems by creating a habitat for native wildlife. We wanted to install a garden that would be beneficial for the production of the farm. We also wanted a space that we could use for educational purposes. We wanted to do this all while conscious of the continual drought that is happening in California. So first thing I'll touch on is our farm. So our farm, we are a no spray farm. We're an organic farm, but we're not certified. Being a nonprofit, we're not doing production for sales purposes, but for community. So everything we do is organic. And so we don't use any chemicals or sprays to combat pests. One of the intentional benefits to the farm for planting the natives is to invite the beneficial insects to help with the farm production, the pollinators to help boost the farm production, and then the predatory insects, which act as our natural pest management for our crops. Another reason we were excited that we got awarded this was for educational purposes. So like I said before, Veggielution serves our community. And so planting the native garden serves as an educational component to the farm. And we are mostly entirely volunteer. How we get most of our projects done is through volunteers. So we're using the native garden to engage volunteers. They helped install it and help maintain it. And in exchange, we answer any questions that we have and encourage them to go and plant their own native gardens. We also excited to invite local schools and community groups into our farm for educational purposes. And just any curious community members that come and have interest in natives, we would like to be able to have something to show while we explain. So, but one of the main reasons was for the monarch habitat. So we got, we planted a lot of milkweed and created a wildlife corridor so that the monarch butterflies would be able to safely come and lay their eggs on the milkweed. And so by giving them a place for doing that, we are increasing their population. Okay. So this is kind of the outline of our plan. So the first year was all about community engagement and installation of the garden. And right now we are focused on taking care of the garden and maintaining the space. So a lot of that is weeding, and then, so by next year, we're hoping that we can start to use the garden for demonstrational and educational purposes. So like I talked about before, we really want to invite local schools to come in and community groups to learn about natives and monarch butterflies and all the benefits that they have. Okay. So this is the garden space. So you can see there's looks like a Y in the road, and to the left of that is our garden space. This is where we planted the native garden, and we chose this location for a number of different reasons. One being that many years ago we had planted a hedgerow along the edge of the driveway. So this was a continuation of that hedgerow. But because it was a more open space, we were able to make it more into a garden. And on top of that, it's a central location on the farm. So bringing in those native or bringing in beneficials like the pollinators and the predatory insects, they kind of have access to most of the farm from that space. We wanted to have it in a central location. Okay. And we did all this through mostly volunteer power. So being a nonprofit, we heavily rely on our volunteers to help with maintenance on the farm. And so we prepped the area. If you could see at the bottom of the picture, we have a bunch of plastic that had been pulled away. So before the installation of the garden, we had laid that black plastic out to aquatate the area. And it was there for a couple of months. And we pulled it back and spread compost. And this is the day that we planted the garden. So you can see the highway there with all the cars going by, and our wonderful volunteer team working hard to get the area prepped. So we weeded and then we planted and put out irrigation. And the prep took a while. We did a number of different volunteer days leading to the installation day, but the installation day where we installed the plants and the irrigation and laid it out all happened in one day with this wonderful team of volunteers that we had. And this isn't all of them. Some of them had left earlier in the day, but these are the ones that stuck through the heat and helped us get everything planted. So going on to our next steps, we need to continually maintain this area because it is a big space. So we're constantly combating weeds. And so we have a number of different groups that have come in, one of them being Youth for Good. They've come multiple times to work in this garden area. And last weekend, we did a big push to get it all weeded, and we sheet mulched the larger areas and installed some more native plants that we got from the Emma Prush Park Foundation. They had also gotten awarded a Xerxes kit, and they had some leftover plants for us. So we could, they were very kind to let us use some of the plants that they got awarded. And so these are our next steps with the garden space. The weed management, so I already talked about using sheet mulching, where you lay down cardboard to create a barrier between the soil and the exposed area of the garden. So we put cardboard down and used wood chips to keep that covered. We're planning on spreading native wildflower cover crop to combat the weeds that are in that garden space. And so we did have a few plants fail, and that was due to our main pest on the farm, which is peacocks. We have a lot of peacocks enjoyed the irrigation system. So they would dig out the plants and make little holes where the water would come out. And so we lost a few plants from the peacocks, but going forward, when we're planting, we're putting tomato cages around them so that the peacocks and the chickens can't dig them out. But I think we lost around 10 to 15 of the hardier plants. And we've already started to replace those. And then once the garden is established and the plants are a little bit bigger, we're going to start using it as a teaching tool for local schools and community groups. And we're really going to start to spread the word about the natives and the monarchs. So this is our progress photo. This is the hedge or garden space next to one of our fields. And if you can see, our field's all fenced off, and that's also because of peacocks. So yeah, this is, it's establishing well, and we're excited to get it, to see it next year and get the education going for the space. And then we want to say a special thanks to Xerxes Society for awarding us the kit. And then NRCS really helped us with getting the garden started. They helped put the garden plan together, and then helped us also install it with the help of the volunteers. So thank you to these two. And yeah, that's our experience with the Xerxes Society kit that we got.
Well, thank you so much, Lee and Sherry, both for those presentations. It was really great. I feel like when the kits, when we hand the kits out, they're just like little tiny babies, and I love seeing pictures of our babies all grown up. It's really nice. I don't see any questions in the Q&A unless somehow I'm just not able to access them. So I do invite, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat also. So I do invite people to go ahead and type into the Q&A if they want to, or I would say if they prefer, they could unmute or raise their hands and we'll unmute them, but I'm not, I think only the moderator has the power to do that. Evan, is that something you can do if people prefer to just ask questions rather than type?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, just like to give people options. Sometimes
Sure.
people like to type. But I do see one question here. And the question is that This person is a farmer in Placer County, and the owner is a veteran. They have a natural creek on their property that's protected, and they're wondering if they would qualify for a Xerces kit or for USDA EQIP funding. So I can actually speak to that. So it's, in terms of the Xerces habitat kits, private landowners do qualify for the kits as long as it's working lands. So if you are a farm or a ranch, whether you're commercial or not, you do qualify. If it's public land or community garden, that kind of thing, you would also qualify. And I actually think it's probably easier to qualify for the habitat kit program than the USDA's EQIP programs. But I would encourage people to do both, because one does not necessarily preclude the other, and they can be sort of leveraged. So EQIP funding is only for working lands specifically, and they have an income cap for that. And somewhere up in the chat, I put down the contact info of our Xerces has 2 partner biologists with the NRCS, and one is located in Merced and the other is in Hollister. But they cover a really broad region, so they would be good folks to start with, to pursue sort of the EQIP end of things, which, you know, ultimately is more funding and bigger projects than the Xerces kits would ever be. But again, the Xerces kits, basically the only people who the kits really wouldn't be appropriate for would be like a private home garden. That's not the intention of these kits. But other than that, we like to try to fund great diversity of different types of projects. So I hope that answers that. Anybody else? I have questions. Sherry, I wanted to ask you, and maybe I'll give other people opportunity to think if they have additional questions. I wanted to ask you, it sounds like you had assistance with the implementation, like getting the plants in the ground. Did you have assistance with sort of ongoing management, or is that something you've done yourself? And I apologize if you shared that part. I was also doing the chat box, but how's that worked out for you in terms of just ongoing management?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The ongoing management, I have, I send a worker out probably once a quarter to pick up the tubes, put back the tubes, check the irrigation. But because, you know, we're treating it like a natural environment, so it's not something we're watching weekly or bi-weekly. It's maybe every 2 months.
Oh, so that doesn't sound too bad. That's great. Wonderful.
It's very encouraging right now because, sort of like Lee, everything's growing, and you know, it's that time of year to see who made it. So it's enjoyable to go out there.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think that really helps with the management. If it's a place that you like to spend time, that definitely motivates people to keep taking care of that space, because it's a nice place to be in. So, but that's great. I'm happy to hear it hasn't been an issue. Sometimes I think when people don't have all the infrastructure in place before they plant, like irrigation and, you know, plan for weed management and that kind of thing, they struggle sometimes with maintenance. So that's great to hear. Couple more in the chat box. I think there's somebody asking about funds for irrigation. I am not aware. The only funding for irrigation that I'm aware of wouldn't apply to the horticulture industry. This person has a nursery, I think. The NRCS does have some cost share programs for irrigation, but it's usually involved around like water quality or water conservation issues. So like switching from sprinkler to drip or something like that. So I'm not sure if this is, not sure if that would apply. Drip irrigation is probably the least expensive, but you still need infrastructure. Lee or Sherry, are you aware of any cost shares for irrigation specifically, or funding for irrigation?
Again, we were lucky time-wise and review-wise to get equip funding. So I'm sure they take that into consideration.
Yeah, like in theory, like a hedgerow application, there's like a whole formula that goes into determining what the cost share is. In theory, it is supposed to include the cost of irrigation, but I think it kind of assumes that there's like maybe already infrastructure in place. So you're not obviously like digging a well or even like putting in a new valve, but maybe you're just hooking into something and hooking up drip. So I don't, it's not a huge amount of money.
Yeah, the grant had money allocated to that, as far as I remember. Yeah, and we were already equipped with the infrastructure, so there was no digging. It was just connecting to our irrigation. So we just bought the timer and the poly pipe that went down.
So you already had like basically general irrigation for the area set up, and you were just extending it into the habitat area, Lee? Or
Right. Yeah. So actually, we went off of a hose spigot. We just with our volunteers, we dug a trench and just hooked up some PVC to the hose spigot and ran it to the garden. And then from there, we use drip irrigation.
got it. Okay. There's another question in here, and it says, how much acreage can the Xerces kits apply to, and is there a limit in the number of plants that people can receive? So we have sort of different size kits for different types of projects. Our smaller kits are for like community garden or urban farm projects, and I think those are only like 32 plants, and they're kind of smaller in stature. Our larger kits are for anywhere from 85 plants to several hundred. Sorry, I'm trying to remember because we have so many different kits. And so those would be for like larger areas, and you can apply for multiple kits. So like say like one hedgerow kit is for enough for like 500 linear feet of a hedgerow, usually about 10 feet wide. But if you wanted to do a 5,000 foot hedgerow and you had the space and the plan for that, you could apply for 10 kits. We don't really have an upper limit within reason. But we do obviously have a finite amount of funding. So we invite people to apply. It's called an interest form. And then we go through those forms and we select projects that based on, how well thought out and planned out they are. And as well as some other criteria, like we try to do a good geographic representation. And we also try to award kits sort of equally to farmers and ranchers and natural areas and urban areas and tribes, so that we're kind of meeting a lot of different demographics, the needs of a lot of different demographics. But that web page, and I'll put it in the chat box again, but that web page probably has more of that information. You can kind of see the different size kits that are available to people. Let's see. Can't see raised hands. I don't think. I feel like I can't see anybody else besides the speakers and the moderators on this view. But Evan, are there any raised hands? Oh, wait, I see her.
We're letting Hannah speak. She had a hand up.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, can you hear me? I'm sorry. I don't know if I had sorry. I did that on accident. I think my question was already answered. Thanks,
Okay.
Jessa.
No problem. We can hear you though. So, and now I can see your hand. So that's good.
Okay.
I have a comment, Jessa. I did not give a big enough shout out to my extension agent, who was the one who I would not have known about this. And she's the one, the Healthy Soils program was going on with the state of California. I didn't move quick enough. And she said, well, why don't you see about pollinators and that might be beneficial for your farm. And she's the one who started me down the road to finding out what to do. So that's a resource that I hope everybody in CAFF takes advantage of, because their job is to help us. We have a small farm a specialist, and she's been invaluable for me.
Is that Margaret?
That's Margaret.
Yeah, she's so great. And I'm more familiar with, I'm in Sacramento, so I'm more familiar with our local people, but our extension folks here are excellent. And as are our NRCS partners and RCD partners as well. I think those agencies, the NRCS, the RCDs, which are resource conservation districts, and UC Extension, Farm Advisors, those have all been really good resources, at least in my experience. Yeah, Lee, I had a question for you, because I'm really interested in some of the more technical information. So you mentioned that you were going to be planting a native cover crop for weed suppression, which is something, weeds, you shared that that's something that you struggle with, and that seems to be pretty universal. So I'm just curious if you have tried it before, how it's worked, if you know what species you're going to use. I just was really interested in hearing more about that part of it. Oh, now it looks like Lee's frozen.
Oh.
Lee, are you there?
I think we may have lost him.
Oh, bummer. Okay, well, we'll just have to wait, and hopefully he can come back and I can get that question answered. Let's see, any other questions we still have a little more time if people have other questions about the program, anything related. I have a question for the group as a whole. I can always think of questions. And this is actually to the audience, so people can type in the chat box, or just raise their hand and get unmuted. But as I mentioned, was one of the things that people have struggled with. It's really been a barrier to adoption in terms of habitat. It's just the plant materials and sourcing those plants and the technical assistance. The other challenge I know that people have is with the labor, like getting those plants in the ground. In particular, it's kind of like a whole bunch of work all at one time, and then sort of the ongoing management. So both Sherry and Lee shared their different volunteer resources that they had. Sherry had the SLUES program, which is a fabulous program, but it's somewhat localized. It sounded like Lee was plugged into some of the programs more in his area. And I'm just putting it out to the audience because I'm always trying to connect. So a lot of times people get the kits from us and then want to know if we can help plant them or if we know anyone who can. It's really hard for us to help with the hands-on work because we're a pretty small organization. And last year we awarded 90 different projects that were all over the state. So it's very hard for us to actually get on the ground and help people. Do people know, does anybody out there know of other good volunteer resources that we could because we're trying to connect, the people getting the kits with maybe volunteers who can help plant them or even manage them over time. Just throwing it out there. Well, if people do think of anything, do let me know.
Feedback.
Oh, Lee's back. Great. Yeah. So people do think of any volunteer groups that, you want to be connected with projects or wouldn't mind being connected or interested in this kind of thing. Maybe shoot me an email. I'm going to put my email back in the chat box again. I'm kind of collecting a list of folks and, trying to just connect people together. Let's see. So I'm going to go back to my question for Lee before we run out of time. And then I'm also looking at some of the stuff in the chat box. But Lee, before you froze and then we lost you, I was asking you about cover cropping. You mentioned wanting to do some cover cropping for weed suppression, right, with native plants. And I was really curious about what you were using, if you've done it before, how it worked out for you, that kind of thing?
So we have tried cover cropping on the farm before, and we tried a number of different ones. The best one that as far as the farm's benefit went, it was a mix between oats, vetch, and field peas. But I think what we're going to be doing in the native area is a mix of native wildflowers. So Phacelia, yarrow, California poppies, I believe Gilead is in there. I have a list somewhere. I could probably find it. But it is it's just a mix of different native wildflowers, and they really help to just cover the area, because right now what we're getting is grasses and mallows and some thistles, stuff that isn't that showy, you know, and we want to have we want the garden to look really nice. And I think so my thought process was a way to combat that was with a native wildflower mix.
Cool, that's great. Oh, let me go back to the Q&A. I think we might have time for one or two more. Looks like there's a few more here. Okay, this one starts with, I have a complicated question. I manage a large steep hillside with poor soil. I'm using cover crops and goats to improve the soil and to maintain the weeds because it's too steep to mow. How do I know if the habitat kits are safe for goats to eat? Is it even, second half of the question, is it even possible to have goats and pollinators in the same space? Can they work together? So to the second point, yes, I think goats and pollinators can coexist probably quite happily. I've been on farms where they've had both of those present, even like managed honeybee hives where there's a lot of pollinators, right? Because with honeybees, you get a much larger population than you would with just native bees that are, moving into the area. And I haven't heard of any negative interactions between the livestock and pollinators. And the same is actually true for ranches where there's cattle or other types of livestock. In terms of toxicity, so this is a question that we get a lot, and it's a tricky question because toxicity is different. So what a person what might cause toxicity for a human is different than a horse, is different than sheep, and is also different from cattle. So one thing that I will say is that milkweed is generally toxic to most livestock, also to people and to pets. However, it's extremely bitter and unpalatable. And I've only ever heard of livestock touching it in areas that are severely overgrazed. So those are the only situations. So a lot of rangelands do have a lot of milkweed present. And a lot of ranchers don't worry too much about it as long as they're managing their grazing well, because the cattle will always prefer grass over forbs, and definitely anything over milkweed, again, because it's very unpalatable and you would have to consume a really large quantity to get sick if you're a cow. Goats are a little different. I feel like goats eat everything indiscriminately. So I don't have a good answer for that. I also feel like goats must have cast iron stomachs because I've seen them eating all kinds of bizarre things. But I don't directly manage livestock, so I think that would require a little bit of research. What I could provide is the list of the plants that would be in the kits, and beyond the milkweed, I don't know if anything else would be toxic.
We had a comment here in the chat section that someone says, yeah, our goats eat milkweed and poisonous hemlock with no issues. And I imagine tin cans and everything else in between. So thank you, Leah, for that crowdsourced knowledge. Well, looks like we're at time here. So just wanted to say big thanks to Jessa and to Sherry and to Lee. Thank you so much for being here. And to all of our participants for sharing all their information and questions. And we hope to see more pollinators and California flourishing with monarchs once again. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Sherry.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lee.